Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're about to step into the muddy, rat-infested nightmare that was life in a World War I trench. You're standing in 1916, somewhere along the Western Front, and that squelching sound beneath your feet, that's not just mud. It's a horrifying mixture of clay, blood, and things you really don't want to think about. Let's be honest here. You wouldn't last 24 hours in this hellscape, and by the end of tonight's story, you'll be grateful for your warm, dry bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Alright, let's begin the story. The moment you materialize in this trench, your senses are assaulted by a cocktail of horror that no amount of Call of Duty has prepared you for. The stench hits first. Imagine the worst bathroom you've ever encountered. Multiply it by 1,000. Then add the sweet, sick smell of decomposition. Your boots, those pristine leather things you're wearing, immediately sink ankle deep into what the soldiers darkly call French butter, a nauseating mixture of mud, human waste, and liquefied corpses that haven't been retrieved from previous battles. You instinctively reach for the wooden boards lining the trench walls, but your hand comes away slimy. Everything here is coated in a film of moisture and decay. The trenches stretch about 7 feet deep, though constant shelling and rain have caused sections to collapse, creating pools of standing water that reach your knees. You notice soldiers sleeping standing up, propped against the walls like broken mannequins, because lying down means drowning in the muck. A rat the size of a house cat scurries past your leg, its belly bloated from feeding on the dead. These aren't your typical city rats. They've grown massive on their grisly diet. And soldiers tell stories of waking up to find them gnawing on the faces of sleeping men. Some units organize rat hunting parties for sport, though historians still argue whether this was more for pest control or simply to maintain sanity in an insane world. The geography of your new home is a maze of confusion. Main trenches run parallel to enemy lines, connected by communication trenches that zigzag to prevent enemy fire from traveling straight down the line. You'll learn quickly that getting lost can be fatal. One wrong turn might lead you straight into no man's land, or, worse, into enemy territory. Soldiers have carved crude signs into the mud walls with names like Piccadilly Circus or Paradise Alley. Desperate attempts to impose order on chaos. Your modern immune system is already rebelling against the bacterial soup surrounding you. Within hours, you'll develop trench mouth, a painful gum infection that makes eating agony. The latrine situation is, well, there isn't one. Designated buckets overflow constantly, and during heavy shelling, soldiers simply relieve themselves where they stand. Privacy is a concept that died with the first artillery barrage. Here's a tidbit that rarely makes it into the history books. Soldiers developed their own perfumes from whatever they could find: crushed flowers, tobacco, even gunpowder, anything to mask the overwhelming stench. One British officer wrote home requesting his wife send him her strongest lavender water, not for vanity, but for survival. He claimed it was the only thing that kept him from vomiting during morning inspections. The screaming starts around dawn, not human screaming, but the distinctive whistle of incoming shells that makes your blood freeze. Someone shouts, "Gas! Gas!" and suddenly, you're fumbling with equipment you've never seen before, trying to remember instructions nobody gave you while yellow-green death creeps across the cratered landscape like a living thing. Your hands shake as you grab the canvas and rubber contraption that passes for a gas mask in 1917, and you've got maybe 15 seconds before your lungs start dissolving from the inside out. The mask itself is a primitive horror, a rubberized canvas hood with foggy glass eyepieces that immediately steam up from your panicked breathing. The mouthpiece tastes like industrial chemicals, and you have to bite down hard on it while breathing through your nose. Except wait, that's wrong. You're supposed to breathe through the filter canister, but nobody explained how. And now chlorine gas is seeping through gaps in the seal because the mask doesn't quite fit your 21st century face shape. Your eyes start burning first, even through the mask. Tears stream down your face, mixing with snot as your body desperately tries to flush out the poison. The soldiers around you move with practiced efficiency born from terror. They've done this dance before. One young private near you starts hyperventilating, rips off his mask too soon, and drops to his knees retching. Blood-tinged foam bubbles from his mouth as he claws at his throat. Two medics drag him away, but you already know he won't make it. The gas attack lasts 20 minutes that feel like hours. When the all clear finally sounds, you peel off the suffocating mask to find your skin covered in chemical burns where the straps dug in. The trench reeks of chlorine mixed with vomit. Half the unit couldn't get their masks on properly. Bodies lie twisted in pools of their own fluids, their faces purple and contorted. This is what modern warfare looks like in 1917, and you're already calculating how many hours until the next attack. Here's something historians still argue about. The psychological impact of gas wasn't just about the physical damage. Soldiers reported nightmares about drowning on dry land for decades afterward. One French veteran described gas attacks as being murdered by the air itself, and many men preferred the quick death of a bullet to the slow suffocation of phosgene. The Germans initially considered gas attacks uncivilized, but after the Second Battle of Ypres, everyone was racing to develop deadlier chemicals. The irony that'll make you laugh if you weren't so terrified. Those early gas masks were often more dangerous than helpful. The chemicals used in the filters could poison you if they got wet, which happened constantly in the trenches. Soldiers had to choose between risking gas exposure or filter poisoning. Some units issued urine-soaked cloth as emergency protection, based on the scientifically dubious theory that ammonia neutralized chlorine. Imagine explaining to your modern friends that you survived World War I by breathing through pee-soaked rags. Between attacks, you practice gas drills until your fingers bleed from the rough canvas straps. The instructors, scarred veterans missing parts of their faces, teach you to recognize different gases by smell, chlorine like swimming pools, phosgene like freshly cut hay, mustard gas oddly sweet. They make dark jokes about becoming sommeliers of death, comparing poison gas vintages while demonstrating how to check wind direction with a wet finger. One sergeant missing half his nose cheerfully explains that mustard gas is particularly nasty because it soaks through uniforms and burns everything it touches, especially the moist areas. Imagine your armpits on fire from the inside, he says with a grin that doesn't reach his remaining eye. You learn that gas masks must be carried at all times, even to the latrine. One soldier tells you about his mate who left his mask behind for a quick bathroom trip and got caught in a surprise gas shell attack. They found him with his pants around his ankles, face purple. Dignified death definitely not on the menu. The gas alarm, usually a bell or empty shell casing, becomes the most terrifying sound in your new existence. Worse than artillery because at least shrapnel kills quickly. Your feet have been wet for exactly 72 hours now, and something deeply wrong is happening inside your boots. What started as mild discomfort has transformed into an agony that makes you understand why soldiers shoot themselves in the foot, not to escape combat, but to escape the slow rot consuming their extremities. When you finally work up the courage to peel off your puttees and boots, the smell that escapes makes even the battle-hardened sergeant next to you gag. Your socks come away in pieces, taking layers of dead skin with them, revealing feet so swollen and discolored they look like waterlogged corpses attached to your ankles. The medical officer takes one look and shakes his head. "Classic trench foot," he mutters, poking at your blackened toes with a wooden stick because touching them directly risks spreading the necrosis. Your feet are literally decomposing while still attached to your body. A combination of constant moisture, cold, and restricted blood flow has created the perfect conditions for tissue death. The nerves are so damaged that when he drives a needle into your big toe, you feel nothing. That's when the real fear sets in, because no feeling means the rot has gone deep. "Keep them dry," he says with a straight face, as if that's remotely possible when you're standing in 3 feet of water. He hands you whale oil to rub on your feet, assuming you can bend down far enough in full gear without toppling into the mud. The oil smells like rancid fish and does absolutely nothing except make your feet even more slippery inside your boots. Some units have started mandatory foot inspections where soldiers pair up to check each other's feet, leading to the bizarre intimacy of grown men massaging each other's rotting toes with whale blubber. The prevention methods border on comedy if they weren't so desperately tragic. Command sends down orders to change socks twice daily. With what dry socks? Nobody specifies. You're supposed to exercise your feet by wriggling your toes, but movement sends shooting pains up your legs like electric shocks. One innovative officer suggests standing on duckboards for 10 minutes every hour, as if the duckboards themselves aren't submerged. Another distributes wooden clogs supposedly inspired by Dutch fishermen, which promptly sink into the mud and have to be abandoned. Here's a detail that rarely makes it into documentaries. Soldiers developed elaborate foot-drying rituals that bordered on religious ceremonies. They'd burn precious cigarette papers to create tiny fires in tin cans, holding their feet over the smoke. Men would trade their rum rations for dry socks, and stealing someone's foot powder was considered worse than stealing food. One Scottish regiment swore by stuffing their boots with dry grass every morning, though historians still argue whether this actually helped or just provided false comfort. The progression from discomfort to amputation happens frighteningly fast. First, your feet go numb and swell until your boots feel like iron vices. Then the skin turns white and wrinkled like you've been in the bath too long, except it doesn't return to normal. Red blotches appear, then purple, then black. The smell gets worse, sweet and rotten like spoiled meat. By the time gangrene sets in, amputation isn't a possibility, it's a mercy. The field hospital you're evacuated to looks like a medieval butcher shop, with piles of severed feet outside the surgical tent. You watch a 19-year-old farm boy from Yorkshire have both feet removed with a bone saw while he's still conscious. Morphine is reserved for abdominal wounds. He bites through a leather strap and passes out from the pain, which the surgeon considers a blessing. Later, delirious with fever, he keeps asking when he can put his boots back on for morning inspection. The survival rate after amputation is about 50-50, depending on whether infection sets in. Those who make it home face a lifetime of phantom pain, feeling their missing feet burn and itch in the middle of the night. The truly maddening part: officers rarely get trench foot because they have batmen to dry their boots and multiple pairs to rotate. While you're watching your toes turn black, some lieutenant is having his feet powdered by his personal servant in a relatively dry dugout. It's one of those small inequalities that makes men consider fragging their superiors, not the big injustices, but the little ones like dry feet that remind you exactly where you stand in the military hierarchy. The rats arrive at night in numbers that defy comprehension, flowing through the trenches like a grey-brown river of fur and teeth. You've seen rats before, maybe caught glimpses of them in subway stations or dumpsters. But these trench rats are different creatures entirely, evolved into monsters by an endless food supply of human flesh. They're the size of rabbits, some even bigger, with sleek coats and intelligent eyes that size you up like you're their next meal, which, if you die tonight, you absolutely will be. Your first encounter comes while trying to catch a few minutes of sleep propped against the fire step. Something heavy lands on your chest, and you open your eyes to find a massive rat sitting on your greatcoat, whiskers twitching as it evaluates whether you're alive or dead. When you jerk upward with a strangled yell, it doesn't scurry away in fear like a normal rat. It hisses at you, revealing yellow teeth the size of pencil erasers, before casually waddling off to find easier prey. Sleep becomes impossible after that, knowing these creatures are constantly evaluating your potential as a meal. The rats have lost all fear of humans, treating soldiers as minor inconveniences in their nightly feasts. They gnaw through canvas, leather, and even tin to reach food supplies, but their preferred delicacy remains human corpses. You watch them stream out of holes in no man's land at dusk, their eyes glinting green in the dying light, heading for the bodies nobody can retrieve. The sounds they make while feeding, the tearing, crunching, and satisfied squeaking, carry clearly across the battlefield on quiet nights. Some soldiers claim they can tell how fresh a corpse is by the excitement level of the rat squeaks. But rats are just the headline act in your new insect and rodent variety show. The lice arrive within hours of your first trench duty, microscopic invaders that set up elaborate civilizations in the seams of your uniform. They're not ordinary lice. These are champion breeding, Olympic-level bloodsuckers that can survive boiling water and military-grade delousing powder. You feel them moving constantly, thousands of tiny legs marching across your skin in formation, and the itching drives men literally insane. One corporal strips naked during morning stand-to and runs screaming through the trench, clawing at his skin until he draws blood. The delousing rituals become sacred ceremonies of futility. Soldiers run lit candles along the seams of their shirts, listening for the satisfying pop of exploding lice eggs. They call it chatting, from the Hindi word chat, meaning to crush, and it becomes a social activity like grooming chimps. You'll sit in circles during quiet moments, hunting lice and comparing body counts. The record in your unit is 1,037 lice from a single shirt, counted by a meticulous Welsh private who insisted on categorizing them by size. Here's something disturbing that historians still argue about. Some units developed rat-taming programs, feeding specific rats to keep them loyal and training them to attack enemy rats. Whether this was genuine pest control or just bored soldiers anthropomorphizing rodents remains debatable, but several diary entries describe elaborate rat hierarchies with names like General Whiskers and Corporal Greyfur. One Scottish regiment allegedly trained rats to carry messages through the walls, though this might have been whiskey-fueled fantasy. The flies arrive with summer, great buzzing clouds that turn the air black. They breed in the corpses and latrines, then land on your food, your face, your open wounds. Eating becomes an exercise in fly management. You develop techniques for shoveling food into your mouth while simultaneously waving away insects. The flies are so thick during some meals that you give up and just eat them along with your bully beef. Considering them extra protein, they crawl into your ears and nose while you sleep, and you wake up spitting them out of your mouth. Then there are the medical oddities. Soldiers develop phobias about creatures crawling into their bodies. One private becomes convinced that rats are nesting in his stomach after accidentally swallowing a fly. He stops eating and has to be force-fed by medics. Another swears he can feel lice breeding under his skin, scratching until he creates open sores that actually do become infected. The medical officer, overwhelmed with real casualties, prescribes extra rum and tells them to sort themselves out. The human mind, it turns out, isn't designed to coexist with this level of infestation. The shelling starts at 3:47 a.m. You know because you've been staring at your watch for hours, unable to sleep. When the first whistle shriek splits the air, your body recognizes the sound before your brain does, muscles liquefying as you dive for the nearest dugout. The explosion hits 50 yards away, but the concussion wave slams through your chest like a giant's fist, rupturing something deep inside your ears. Now every sound comes through wet cotton, and your hands won't stop shaking. Welcome to your introduction to shell shock, though calling it that is apparently controversial. Some officers insist you're just a coward. After the barrage lifts, you emerge to find Private Morrison sitting upright at his post, rifle across his lap, looking perfectly normal, except his eyes are gone, not gouged out, just gone, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare that means his mind has vacated the premises. When you touch his shoulder, he starts screaming in a high, reedy voice like a broken violin, then stops mid-scream and begins giggling. The giggling is worse than the screaming. 2 stretcher bearers carry him away, but everyone knows he'll be back tomorrow because the generals don't believe in psychiatric casualties. Your own unraveling happens gradually. First, you notice your hands trembling whenever you try to light a cigarette. Then comes the stuttering. You've never stuttered in your life, but now words stick in your throat like physical objects. Sleep becomes a foreign concept. Every time you close your eyes, phantom shells explode behind your eyelids, so you develop a peculiar head-bobbing tic, constantly ducking from invisible shrapnel. The other men don't mock you for it because half of them are twitching too. The medical officer's treatment for your nervous exhaustion involves a cold bath and a lecture about moral fibre. He's a Victorian-era doctor who believes mental illness is a character flaw, prescribing firmness of purpose and threatening court-martial for malingering. When you explain that loud noises make you vomit and your legs randomly give out, he suggests more exercise. One soldier who can't stop his hands from shaking is diagnosed with hysterical tremor and treated by having his arms tied to his sides until he decides to stop shaking. The cure rate is predictably 0. Here's what the medical establishment doesn't understand yet. Your nervous system is literally rewiring itself for survival. Every neural pathway is now devoted to detecting threats, leaving no capacity for normal human function. Historians still argue whether shell shock was purely psychological or involved actual brain damage from repeated concussions. Modern analysis of preserved brain tissue shows microscopic scarring consistent with blast injuries. But in 1917, invisible wounds don't exist. If you're not bleeding, you're not wounded. Simple as that. The varieties of breakdown are endless and creative. One sergeant becomes convinced he's made of glass and refuses to sit down for fear of shattering. A corporal loses the ability to see anything khaki-colored, which makes military life challenging. Your bunkmate develops hysterical blindness that only affects his right eye, the one he uses to aim his rifle, suspicious, according to the officers, though watching him walk into walls suggests otherwise. Another man forgets how to speak English, but can still speak fluent Welsh, leading to accusations of malingering until someone points out he never knew Welsh before the war. The truly insidious part is how shell shock spreads through units like a contagion. One man's tremor triggers another's tic, which sets off someone else's stutter, creating a feedback loop of neurological chaos. Entire battalions develop synchronized flinching patterns, ducking in unison at imaginary shells. During one memorable breakfast, an entire mess table starts shaking simultaneously when someone drops a tin plate. The medical corps responds by isolating shell shock cases, but this just makes everyone hide their symptoms until they completely snap. You learn to recognize the warning signs in yourself and others, the way Jenkins starts humming tunelessly before a panic attack, how Thompson's left eye twitches faster as his breaking point approaches. You develop coping mechanisms that would seem insane in civilian life, counting your buttons obsessively, tapping your rifle stock in specific patterns, reciting your mother's maiden name backwards. These rituals are the only thing standing between you and complete dissolution. When the chaplain suggests prayer might help, someone points out that God clearly isn't listening to anyone in this particular postal code. The whistle blows at dawn and your stomach drops through your boots because this is it, the big push. The moment you charge across no man's land toward the German trenches, your sergeant, drunk on rum and false bravado, shouts something about glory and country, but all you can focus on is the churned wasteland ahead, 400 yards of mud, craters, and twisted wire that might as well be 400 miles. The machine guns are already chattering their death song, and you haven't even climbed the ladder yet. "Over the top, lads," comes the cry, and suddenly you're climbing, rifle in sweaty hands, emerging into a hellscape that defies comprehension. The noise hits first, not just loud but physically painful, a wall of sound that includes screaming shells, rattling machine guns, and the worst sound of men already dying. You take 3 steps and watch Jenkins, who shared his chocolate with you yesterday, fold in half as bullets stitch across his middle. He drops into the mud, still trying to hold his intestines in place, calling for his mother in a voice that doesn't sound human anymore. The plan, explained by officers who won't be joining you, is simple. Walk steadily toward the enemy lines, maintaining formation. Don't run. It's undignified and breaks unit cohesion. The reality is that within seconds, any semblance of formation dissolves into chaos. You're running, stumbling, crawling through mud that sucks at your boots like quicksand. Bodies pile up at gaps in your own wire, where men bunch up trying to get through, creating killing fields for German machine gunners who traverse their weapons back and forth like gardeners watering flowers. You dive into a shell crater already occupied by 3 other soldiers and a decomposing German who's been there since last month's failed attack. The smell makes you retch, but at least you're below the line of fire. One of your crater mates is praying loudly in French. Another is trying to stop blood pumping from where his hand used to be, and the third just stares at the sky with empty eyes. You realize with sick clarity that this crater is 20 yards from your own trench and 380 yards from the objective. At this rate, you'll reach Berlin sometime in 1987. The barbed wire is the devil's own invention, twisted in patterns designed by sadists with engineering degrees. It's not just strung between posts. It's layered, coiled, and booby-trapped, creating metal forests that channel men into pre-sighted kill zones. You watch soldiers caught in the wire dancing like marionettes as bullets pluck at them. One poor bastard hangs there for hours, calling for help in steadily weakening voice until someone from your own side shoots him out of mercy. The wire-cutting teams that were supposed to clear paths, they're mostly dead, their heavy equipment making them prime targets. Here's something historians still argue about, whether the walking pace was genius or madness. The theory was that disciplined advance under covering artillery would overwhelm defenders. The reality was that defenders just waited in deep bunkers during bombardment, then emerged to mow down walking targets. Some units ignored orders and ran, with marginally better survival rates, 15% casualties instead of 80%. But running through mud while carrying 60 pounds of gear just meant you died exhausted instead of fresh. The German machine gun positions are works of lethal art, with interlocking fields of fire that create zones where survival is mathematically impossible. The gunners are professionals who've turned killing into an industrial process, changing barrels with practiced efficiency and marking ranges on their weapons. They're not shooting at you personally, you're just part of the day's work quota. One captured German gunner later describes feeling like a factory worker, processing units of enemy soldiers with the same detachment as manufacturing widgets. After 4 hours that feel like 4 years, the recall whistle sounds. Of the 800 men who went over the top with your battalion, maybe 200 make it back. You crawl through the wire gaps, past pieces of people you ate breakfast with, dragging a wounded Welshman who keeps apologizing for bleeding on your uniform. The generals call it a limited success because you've gained 30 yards in some sectors. The arithmetic is simple. At this rate, breaking through to Berlin will only cost 12 million lives. Someone points out that there aren't 12 million men in the entire British Empire, but mathematics has never been the strong suit of the officer class. Your breakfast arrives in a tin that might have been new when Queen Victoria was young, containing a substance optimistically labelled meat and vegetables. Opening it releases an odour that makes the trench smell pleasant by comparison, somewhere between wet dog and industrial accident. The meat, if that's what it is, has the consistency of rubber and a grey-green tinge that suggests it's already been digested once. You force it down anyway because the alternative is starving, and your body needs fuel for another day of not dying. The biscuits are another adventure in military cuisine. Hardtack doesn't do justice to these geological specimens that could double as armor plating. You need to soak them in water for an hour just to avoid breaking your teeth, and even then, they taste like cardboard that's been filtered through dirt. One enterprising soldier uses his biscuit to hammer in tent pegs, then eats it anyway. The weevils are considered bonus protein. At least they're fresh. You learn to tap your biscuit on something hard to knock out the worst of the insects, though some always remain, adding a pleasant crunch to the otherwise monotonous texture. Tea arrives lukewarm in a communal dixie that's been passed through a dozen filthy hands. It tastes of petrol because everything tastes of petrol. The water comes up in cans that previously held fuel, and no amount of rinsing removes that distinctive flavour. The tea leaves are recycled multiple times until they're just brown dust that colours the water. Sugar is theoretical, milk is a fantasy. And yet this terrible brew becomes the highlight of your day because at least it's hot and contains caffeine. The rum ration is the only thing that makes any of this bearable. Distributed at dawn and dusk. It's supposedly a tablespoon, but depends entirely on whether the sergeant likes you. The rum is industrial strength, burning your throat like liquid fire and making your eyes water. Some men save their ration to trade for food or cigarettes, but most knock it back immediately Because why delay the only genuine pleasure in this hellscape? Officers get whiskey, naturally, because even in democratic death, class distinctions must be maintained. Fresh food is a mythical concept you've forgotten existed. The supply chain from field kitchens to front lines involves so many hands that anything remotely edible gets redistributed along the way. Tins marked strawberry jam contain mysterious red paste that tastes nothing like strawberries and everything like sadness. The bread, when it arrives, is often green with mold or hard as concrete from age. You eat it anyway, scraping off the worst bits and telling yourself the mold is just penicillin 20 years early. Here's something that rarely makes the history books. Soldiers developed elaborate food fantasies that bordered on religious visions. Men would spend hours describing imaginary meals in pornographic detail, arguing about the proper consistency of Yorkshire pudding or the ideal temperature for serving tripe. One corporal keeps a journal that's nothing but menus from restaurants he plans to visit after the war. He reads them aloud during quiet moments like poetry, reducing grown men to tears with descriptions of roast beef and apple pie. The parcels from home are events worthy of holidays. When Thompson gets a package from his wife containing real cake, the entire platoon gathers around like disciples at the Last Supper. The cake is divided with mathematical precision. Everyone gets exactly 1 cubic inch, measured with calipers borrowed from the artillery observers. You place your piece on your tongue and let it dissolve slowly, trying to make the sweetness last. It's gone in seconds, but the memory sustains you for weeks. Food becomes currency, motivation, and obsession. Men risk court-martial stealing from supply dumps, not for monetary gain, but for the chance to taste something that isn't preserved in chemicals. A tin of peaches becomes worth more than gold, and actual chocolate causes fistfights. You find yourself dreaming not of women or home, but of hot dinners and cold beer. One soldier trades his good luck charm, a locket with his sweetheart's picture, for a tin of condensed milk. When asked why, he simply says, "She'll understand. She's never been hungry." The saddest part is, he's probably right about both counts. The sniper's bullet cracks past your ear like a whip made of death, and you drop so fast your chin splits open on the fire step. Blood runs warm down your neck, but you're grateful because bleeding means you're still alive. The man next to you, Williams, Welsh miner, 3 kids back home, wasn't so lucky. He made the fatal error of lighting his pipe above the parapet, just for a second, and now there's a neat hole where his left eye used to be. He's still holding the match, which burns down to his fingers before someone thinks to blow it out. You learn the rules of sniper warfare through other men's mistakes. Never use the same latrine twice in a row. Don't salute officers in forward positions unless you want them dead. Avoid patterns. The human brain loves routines, and snipers love brains that follow routines. That corner where you smoke every morning? Death trap. The periscope you check every hour? They're watching it. One Canadian sergeant tells you snipers can light a cigarette at 600 yards by shooting the match. You think he's joking until you see it happen. The German snipers are artists of death, trained in special schools where they learn anatomy, ballistics, and patience. They work in pairs, shooter and spotter, setting up before dawn in carefully concealed positions. Their rifles have telescopic sights that turn your head into a target the size of a dinner plate. They prefer headshots for the instant kill, but sometimes go for wounds to demoralize. Nothing destroys unit cohesion quite like a man screaming for hours in no man's land. Shot through the stomach but not dead, just out of reach. Your unit sniper is a gamekeeper from Scotland who doesn't talk much and has eyes like a winter morning. He keeps a tally in his notebook, like an accountant of death, range, wind, result. He's killed 43 men that he's certain of, probably more. When you ask how he sleeps, he looks at you with those cold eyes and says, like a baby, they do the same to us. He's not wrong, but watching him work still makes your skin crawl. He can thread a bullet through a 2-inch gap at 300 yards and practices on rats when Germans are scarce. The technological arms race between snipers creates bizarre innovations. Dummy heads on sticks to draw fire, periscope rifles that let you shoot around corners, armor-piercing rounds for when someone gets clever with steel plates. One engineer designs a fake tree trunk made of iron with viewing slots, hauled into no man's land at night to replace a real tree. It works for 3 days before German artillery reduces it to modern art. Everything is camouflage and deception. Even that dead horse might hide a sniper if it's been there long enough. Here's what historians still argue about: whether sniper warfare was more or less humane than mass slaughter. Some claim the precision reduced overall casualties. Others point out the psychological damage of never knowing when death might reach out from a distant rifle. Units with aggressive snipers report higher rates of nervous breakdown because men can't relax, even in supposedly safe areas. The constant vigilance required, always crouching, always watching, never standing straight, creates a population of permanent hunchbacks. Counter-sniper work becomes its own deadly game of chess. Your marksman spends hours glassing the enemy lines through a telescope, looking for the telltale signs: a wisp of smoke, a glint of light on glass, disturbed earth where someone dug in. When two snipers hunt each other, it becomes personal. They leave calling cards, playing cards on bodies, specific wound patterns. One German sniper always shoots through the right eye. Your Scottish gamekeeper becomes obsessed with finding him, spending off-duty hours studying the landscape through his scope. The random death from invisible enemies breaks men in unique ways. You develop a permanent crick in your neck from never standing fully upright. Cigarettes are smoked cupped in palms, invisible from any distance. Men piss in bottles rather than risk the latrines. One corporal hasn't removed his helmet in 3 weeks, convinced it's the only thing keeping snipers from reading his thoughts. Another draws elaborate diagrams of safe zones that exist only in his increasingly fractured mind. You catch yourself calculating angles of fire while trying to sleep, your brain running trajectory mathematics instead of dreams. This is what modern warfare does to the human mind, turns it into a machine for calculating death probabilities, running constantly, never shutting down. The letter from home arrives 3 months late, water-stained and torn. But you clutch it like a holy relic because it's proof that somewhere beyond this mudscape, normal life continues. Your sister writes about the price of bread and her new job at the munitions factory, completely unaware that you've died and been resurrected 6 times since she posted this. The gulf between her world and yours yawns so wide you can't bridge it with words. You start a reply 17 times, but what do you say? Dear sis, saw Thompson's brains yesterday. Reminded me of raspberry jam. How's mother? The censorship rules make honest communication impossible anyway. Can't mention locations, unit numbers, casualties, morale, weather, operations, or anything that might aid the enemy. Your letters home become fiction exercises in creative writing. Having a lovely time in France when you're actually in Belgium. Food is adequate when you're gnawing leather boots. Spirits remain high when half your unit is catatonic with shell shock. The censoring officer, a pompous lieutenant who hasn't seen action, takes personal pleasure in blacking out entire paragraphs until your letters look like classified documents. You develop a code with your sweetheart using flower names to represent different hells. Roses mean heavy shelling. Daisies indicate gas attacks. Forget-me-nots represent friends who won't be coming home. She probably thinks you've developed a sudden interest in botany. Her letters back are achingly normal. Gossip about neighbours. A recipe for apple crumble you'll never taste. Worries about her brother joining up. She includes a photograph of herself in a new dress. And you stare at it until the image burns into your retinas because you're forgetting what clean people look like. The mail call becomes a torture of hope and disappointment. Names are read alphabetically, and you learn to calculate your odds by how many letters the mail corporal carries. Williams gets 3, lucky bastard, key. Jenkins gets his usual nothing. His girl married someone else, but he keeps writing anyway. You get 1 thin envelope that turns out to be from your bank, asking about an overdue payment. The absurdity of worrying about 10 shillings when you might not survive until tea time makes you laugh until you cry, or maybe cry until you laugh. Parcels are communal events dissected with surgical precision. Thompson's mother sends socks, shared out 1 per man. Anderson's wife includes cigarettes that disappear in minutes. But the real treasure is gossip from home. Who married whom? Which shops closed? What songs are popular? You cling to these mundane details like life preservers in an ocean of insanity. One soldier receives news that his football team won a match and weeps openly. Not from joy, but from the jarring reminder that somewhere, men still play games that don't involve dying. Here's what letters don't convey, and historians still argue about. The complete transformation of personality that trench warfare creates. Your mother writes asking why your handwriting has changed, not knowing that perpetual shaking makes fine motor control impossible. Your sweetheart mentions you seem different in your letters, more distant, less romantic. How do you explain that the boy who left doesn't exist anymore? That person believed in causes and glory and tomorrow. You believe in keeping your head down and your gas mask handy. The communication delays create tragic comedies of timing. You write asking your brother not to enlist. He's already dead in another sector. Your parents send birthday wishes for your 19th birthday. You've aged a decade in 6 months. Letters arrive for dead men, and protocol demands someone respond. So you forge cheerful notes from corpses. Bill is doing well, sends his love. Meanwhile, Bill is fertilizing a crater 30 yards into no man's land. Loneliness becomes a physical weight despite being surrounded by thousands. You're more isolated than any hermit because hermits choose solitude. This isolation is enforced by death, censorship, and the inability to articulate horrors that civilian language can't express. You develop relationships with rats because at least they're honest about their intentions. One sergeant hasn't spoken in 2 weeks, not from injury but from the futility of words. When asked why, he just points at the landscape and shrugs. What more needs saying? The mail corporal announces no letters for you again, and you pretend not to care while dying inside. Another casualty of the war between home and hell. Your Lee Enfield rifle, that magnificent piece of British engineering you trained with, is now a 7-pound club clogged with mud so thick you could plant crops in it. You squeeze the trigger during morning stand to, and nothing happens. The bolt won't budge. Frozen solid with a combination of rust, dirt, and what might be dried blood from the last man who carried it. The sergeant screams about weapon maintenance while you frantically work the action, knowing that if the Germans attack right now, you'll be throwing rocks like a Stone Age warrior with a uniform. The ritual of cleaning becomes a sick joke in these conditions. You're supposed to run a pull-through down the barrel daily, oil the moving parts, and keep the mechanism pristine. Reality: you're cleaning your rifle in a soup of liquefied corpses and shit. Using motor oil scavenged from shell holes because proper gun oil disappeared weeks ago. The pull-through snaps, leaving fabric stuck in the barrel. You dig it out with a bent nail while praying the weapon doesn't explode in your face next time you fire. Ammunition presents its own nightmare. Bullets arrive in clips that have rusted together into solid blocks. You chip them apart with bayonets, trying not to think about unstable cordite and accidental discharges. Half the rounds are swollen with moisture and won't chamber properly. The other half might fire, might hang fire and explode seconds later, or might do nothing at all. You learn to count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, after pulling the trigger on a dud, waiting to see if it's delayed ignition that'll take your face off. When weapons fail, and they fail constantly, combat devolves into medieval brutality. Your bayonet becomes your most reliable friend, assuming it hasn't snapped off in someone's ribcage. The standard issue bayonet is 17 inches of steel that turns your rifle into a spear, perfect for the cramped confines of trench raids. You learn to thrust and twist, aiming for soft spots between ribs. The instructors back home made it seem clean and simple. They didn't mention the suction sound when you pull it out, or how a dying man's weight can wrench the rifle from your grip. Trench raids at night bring desperation-fueled innovation. Men craft clubs from spiked wooden boards, brass knuckle knives from pilfered metal, and improvised grenades from tin cans packed with nails. One Canadian unit becomes infamous for their trench cleaners, sawed-off shotguns that technically violate international law but effectively clear dugouts. When Germans complain about unsporting weapons, someone points out that gas attacks and flamethrowers already threw sportsmanship out the window. Geneva Convention becomes a punchline to jokes nobody finds funny. Here's something that combat manuals didn't cover, and historians still argue about: the psychological barrier to killing with medieval weapons versus modern ones. Shooting someone at 100 yards feels impersonal, mechanical. Stabbing them with a bayonet while looking into their eyes breaks something fundamental in the human psyche. Veterans describe the moment of penetration, the initial resistance, the sudden give, the warm splash, with 1,000-yard stares. One sergeant keeps a tally of men he's killed with bullets versus bayonet. The bullet count is estimated. The bayonet count is exact. Each face burned into memory. Your backup weapons become increasingly desperate as equipment fails. Entrenching tools transform into battle axes. Sharpened shovels decapitate more efficiently than swords. Signal flares fired point-blank burn through uniforms and flesh. One innovative soldier creates a catapult from a steel helmet and rubber tubing, launching grenades farther than he can throw. It works twice before shrapnel turns him into confetti, but others copy the design anyway. Necessity mothers invention, and desperation fathers monsters. The weapons that don't fail mechanically fail psychologically. You develop a stutter finger, freezing on the trigger when you see enemy soldiers who look like your brother. The rifle, that felt like an extension of your body, now feels alien, too heavy, too cold. Some men can't bring themselves to fix bayonets anymore, their hands shaking too badly to slot steel into steel. Others go the opposite direction, filing their bayonets to razor sharpness and notching stocks for confirmed kills like grim accountants. When your rifle finally jams beyond field repair during a raid, you beat a German soldier unconscious with the butt, the wood splitting against his helmet. Later, waiting for a replacement weapon, you realize you missed that broken rifle like a severed limb. It failed you countless times but saved you more. And in this economy of death, that's the best relationship you can hope for. The screaming from the casualty clearing station carries for half a mile, cutting through the constant artillery rumble like a rusty saw through bone. You're being dragged there now, a chunk of shrapnel the size of a playing card embedded in your thigh, leaving a trail of blood that'll attract rats later. The stretcher bearers stumble through shell holes, apologizing each time they drop you, which is often. One of them is 16 and crying harder than you are. The other keeps muttering prayers in Latin, which doesn't inspire confidence in your survival chances. The medical tent resembles a butcher shop designed by someone with a poor grasp of hygiene and an excellent understanding of hell. Blood covers everything, the wooden duckboards, the canvas walls, the surgeons who've stopped trying to clean between patients. You're dumped on a table sticky with other men's insides, while a doctor who hasn't slept in 3 days evaluates your wound. Not too bad, he says, which means you'll keep the leg. Bad means amputation. Very bad means they move you outside to die with minimal fuss. The anesthesia situation is what you generously call theoretical, chloroform when available, which isn't now, ether if you're lucky, which you aren't. The medical officer produces a leather strap and a half-empty bottle of rum. Bite down hard and try to think of England, he suggests, as if nationalism can overcome the sensation of metal scraping against your femur. The strap tastes of other men's screams. You bite through it anyway when he starts digging for the shrapnel with forceps that look suspiciously like pliers from a mechanic's toolkit. The surgery, if you can call it that, happens at speeds that would horrify future medical professionals, but represent the only chance of beating infection. The doctor works like a demented carpenter, soaring through tissue and clamping vessels with movements born from processing hundreds of bodies. He hums, "It's a long way to Tipperary," while excavating metal from your leg, occasionally pausing to wipe sweat and blood from his eyes with an already soaked sleeve. When he finally extracts the shrapnel, he holds it up like a prize. "Souvenir?" he asks, with a grin that suggests dangerous levels of morphine self-medication. Post-operative care consists of being moved to a tent full of groaning men and forgotten. The nurses, those angels of mercy who deserve sainthood, are outnumbered 50 to 1. They drift between beds like ghosts, changing dressings with gentle hands, while ignoring propositions from delirious soldiers who think they're back home with sweethearts. One nurse hasn't removed her boots in 4 days. Her feet have swollen so much they'll need to cut them off. She keeps working anyway, humming lullabies to dying boys who call her mother in their final moments. Here's what the medical textbooks don't mention, and historians still argue about. The smell of gangrene is sweet, like rotting fruit mixed with meat left in the sun. You learn to recognize it instantly because it means death is counting down. The soldier in the next bed develops it after a minor hand wound. Within 2 days, black streaks race up his arm like poison highways. The surgeon amputates at the elbow, then the shoulder, chasing the infection as it spreads. He dies anyway, but not before describing in delirious detail how he can still feel his missing arm burning. Infection is the real enemy here. Surgical instruments get a quick rinse between patients if you're lucky, a wipe on an apron if you're not. The same bone saw that removed Jenkins' foot is now working on Thompson's skull. Bandages are reused after minimal washing, if any. One orderly jokes that the bacteria are so evolved they've developed their own civilization and postal service. Nobody laughs because it's probably true. Your wound starts weeping pus within hours, which the doctor considers normal healing. You develop a fever that makes the world shimmer like a desert mirage. The morphine shortage means pain becomes your constant companion. When supplies run out completely, they offer aspirin for amputations. One Scottish soldier refuses all pain medication for his leg removal, claiming he doesn't want to die addicted. He passes out from agony 30 seconds into the procedure, which the surgeon considers a blessing. You get a quarter dose that does nothing except make you vomit. The real anesthesia is exhaustion. Eventually, your body simply can't process any more pain signals and shuts down into blessed unconsciousness. You wake to find your wound crudely stitched with what looks like fishing line, already pulling apart at the edges. The doctor pronounces you fit for duty, and you're back in the trenches within a week, legs still weeping through dirty bandages. January brings a cold that turns your bones into icicles and makes death by German bullets seem merciful by comparison. The water in the trenches freezes overnight, trapping your boots in ice that has to be chipped away with bayonets. Your fingers turn white, then blue, then black at the tips. The medical officer glances at them and shrugs. Frostbite is so common they've stopped counting it as a casualty. You wrap your hands in sandbags and pray you'll still be able to hold a rifle when spring comes, assuming you live that long. The greatcoats designed for British weather are laughably inadequate for this continental freeze. Ice forms in your moustache with each breath, creating tiny daggers that stab your lip. Men sleep standing up, huddled together like penguins, because lying down means freezing to the duckboards. One morning, you find Private Morrison frozen solid in a sitting position, his teacup still raised halfway to his lips. It takes 3 men to pry him loose, and his body maintains that shape all the way to the grave. But winter's cold is paradise compared to summer's putrefaction. By July, the temperature turns the trenches into an open-air morgue where decomposition accelerates to horror movie speeds. Bodies you can't retrieve bloat in no man's land until they burst like rotten fruit, releasing clouds of gas that make men vomit through their gas masks. The smell creates a physical presence, thick enough to taste, coating your throat with death's perfume. You breathe through mud-soaked rags and still taste corpses with every meal. The flies in summer form black clouds so dense they block out sunlight. They breed in the bodies, crawl from eye sockets and mouths in moving carpets, then land on your food, your face, your open wounds. Eating becomes a race against insects. You develop techniques for shoveling food directly from tin to mouth while using your other hand as a constantly moving fly swatter. Some men give up and just eat the flies along with their rations, considering it extra protein. Disease spreads faster than rumors, with dysentery turning the latrine areas into Dante's forgotten circle of hell. The seasonal rat populations shift with terrifying mathematics. Winter kills some through cold, but the survivors are the hardiest, meanest specimens. Summer brings population explosions as they feast on abundant corpses, growing fat and fearless. You wake to find them sitting on your chest, evaluating your potential as food. One sergeant swears he saw rats organizing into hunting packs, taking down a wounded soldier too weak to fight back. Whether true or exhaustion-induced hallucination, everyone believes it because nothing seems impossible in this hellscape. Here's what meteorologists didn't predict and historians still argue about: how weather became a weapon itself. Rain turns shell craters into drowning pools that claim more victims than some battles. Fog provides cover for raids, but also hides wire entanglements that tear men apart in the dark. Sudden temperature drops freeze wet uniforms to bodies, creating human icicles. One particularly cruel February night. Men's tears freeze to their faces, leaving strange ice trails that won't thaw until they reach the medical station. If they reach it, the weather drives men mad in unique ways. Constant rain creates a condition called trench shin, where skin simply dissolves from perpetual moisture. Summer heat incubates infections that turn minor scratches into life-threatening abscesses within hours. One soldier becomes convinced the weather is German-controlled, keeping detailed logs of conditions that he believes contain coded enemy messages, or another strips naked during a heatwave and refuses to dress, claiming clothes are a conspiracy to make soldiers easier targets. He shot for insubordination, though everyone agrees he had a point about the visibility issue. Your body adapts in ways that would horrify your former self. You stop noticing when ice forms inside your nostrils. The sensation of dry clothes becomes a distant memory, like childhood birthdays or unrationed food. You develop the ability to sleep through anything except the specific whistle of incoming shells, your brain rewiring for survival. Sweat freezes to your skin in winter, creating an ice armor that actually provides marginal protection against shrapnel. In summer, you ferment in your own juices until your uniform rots off your body. The lucky ones get replacement clothes. The unlucky ones make do with whatever they can scavenge from the dead, trying not to think about why the previous owner no longer needs them. The morning briefing arrives from headquarters, delivered by a fresh-faced lieutenant who still has creases in his uniform and all his original body parts. The general, safe in his chateau 20 miles behind the lines, has decided that your section of trench is untidy and orders an immediate advance of 50 yards to straighten the line. The fact that those 50 yards contain 3 machine gun nests and enough wire to fence Scotland is apparently irrelevant to strategic thinking. The lieutenant delivers these orders with the enthusiasm of someone who won't be participating, then hurries back to safety before anyone can fragrantly suggest where he might insert his map case. Your commanding officer, Major Higgins, is a Victorian fossil who learned tactics from fighting Zulus and believes strongly in the purifying power of cold steel. He responds to reports of German reinforcements by ordering extra bayonet drill. When informed about new enemy gas weapons, he prescribes stiff upper lips and bulldog spirit. His solution to trench foot is more marching. His cure for shell shock is press-ups. You'd think he was actively trying to kill you all, except he's too genuinely stupid for such complex planning. The class divide between officers and men creates a parallel universe within the trenches. While you're eating bully beef from rusty tins, the officers' mess serves fresh eggs and wine on actual tablecloths. Their dugouts have wooden floors, real beds, and gramophones playing music from a world that still makes sense. One colonel has his personal valet iron newspapers before he reads them, ensuring no unseemly wrinkles disturb his morning routine. The same colonel orders a daylight raid because the weather is simply too lovely to waste, resulting in 40% casualties. Communication between leadership and reality breaks down completely. Orders arrive written in language that might be English, but reads like poetry written by a concussed academic. Advance with vigorous enthusiasm while maintaining tactical flexibility translates to run into machine guns and try not to die too quickly. Maps bear no relation to actual terrain because they're drawn by staff officers who've never seen the front. One memorable order instructs you to capture a wood that was blasted into matchsticks 6 months ago. You capture the empty crater where it used to be and declare victory. The promotion system ensures the least competent rise highest. Good officers who actually care about their men have an alarming tendency to die leading from the front. The survivors are either lucky cowards or calculating politicians who view soldiers as numbers on casualty reports. One brigadier visits the trenches for exactly 10 minutes, declares them quite satisfactory, then returns to his chateau to plan an attack that'll kill half your battalion. When it fails, he blames lack of offensive spirit, rather than the minor detail of attacking uphill into fortified positions. Here's what official histories gloss over, and historians still argue about. How many casualties resulted from sheer incompetence versus enemy action? The lions led by donkeys debate continues. But from where you're standing, knee-deep in liquefied comrades, the evidence seems pretty clear. Orders regularly arrive that were clearly written by someone looking at the wrong map, attacking positions already in British hands or defending against enemies who left weeks ago. One infamous incident involves 3 battalions attacking each other in fog because nobody told them they'd all advanced. Feedback from the trenches never reaches decision makers. Reports get sanitized at each level until massive casualties from idiotic frontal assault becomes slight setbacks overcome by heroic determination. A sergeant who writes honestly about conditions gets court-martialed for defeatism. A lieutenant who refuses a suicidal order is shot for cowardice. The message is clear. Reality is whatever headquarters says it is, and dying pointlessly is preferable to admitting mistakes. The final insult comes with medals and mentions in dispatches. Generals who've never heard a shot fired in anger award themselves honors for brilliant strategic planning. The major who ordered you into crossfire gets promoted for tactical innovation. Meanwhile, the corporal who saved 6 men by ignoring orders and going around the machine gun nest gets nothing because initiative is indistinguishable from insubordination. You develop a deep, burning hatred for brass buttons and red tabs that'll last long after the war ends. When peace finally comes, you'll cross streets to avoid men in uniform, not from trauma, but from the memory of being commanded by expensively educated idiots who spent your lives like pocket change. Every Veterans Day, while they make speeches about glory and sacrifice, you'll remember Major Higgins declaring trenchfoot a lack of moral fiber, and wonder how many men died for his stupidity. In this landscape of endless horror, the man sharing your funk hole becomes closer than any brother could be. Thompson started as just another face in the regiment, but after 6 months of hell, you know him better than his own mother. You know he talks in his sleep about his girl Margaret, that he can't stand the taste of bully beef but forces it down anyway, that he's kept the same pair of socks for luck since Ypres even though they're more whole than fabric now. When he develops that twitch in his left eye, you're the one who notices it means he's about to crack, and you share your rum ration without saying a word. The bonds form through tiny gestures that would mean nothing in civilian life, but here represent the difference between sanity and madness. Williams always saves you the corner piece of his bread because he knows you like the crust. Jenkins writes your letters home when the shaking gets too bad to hold a pencil. MacDonald, that tough Glasgow docker, holds your head while you vomit from fear before an attack, then never mentions it again. These small kindnesses are the only proof that humanity still exists in this mechanized slaughter. You develop an entire language without words. A raised eyebrow means gas drill in 10 minutes. A tap on the helmet warns of snipers. The way someone lights their cigarette tells you if they've had bad news from home. You can diagnose a man's mental state by how he cleans his rifle. Methodical means he's holding together. Frantic means he's close to breaking. Giving up entirely means he's already gone. You learn to read each other like books written in scars and twitches. The gallows humor becomes a shared dialect that would horrify civilians, but keeps you marginally sane. You nickname the largest rats after generals. Corpses become landmarks. Turn left at Jenkins' legs, straight on past the German torso. Someone starts a betting pool on which body part will surface next in the soup. It's morbid and horrible and absolutely necessary, because if you can't laugh at death, it'll swallow you whole. When Morrison gets his jaw blown off, Thompson quips that at least he won't have to eat army biscuits anymore. Morrison, unable to speak, gives a thumbs up from his stretcher. Sharing fear becomes more intimate than any physical act. Before going over the top, grown men hold hands without shame. You've seen Thompson cry for his mother, and he's seen you soil yourself during a bombardment. There's no embarrassment left, only survival. You take turns having breakdowns, scheduling them like guard duty. Your turn to fall apart, William says matter-of-factly. I'll watch the wire, and for 20 minutes, you sob like a child while he stands guard. Then you switch roles without judgment. Here's what the recruitment posters didn't mention, and historians still argue about. How these bonds both saved and destroyed men. When Jenkins takes a bullet meant for you, diving across the trench to push you down. The guilt weighs heavier than any pack. Survivor's guilt isn't a future psychological term. It's your daily existence. Why did Thompson die and not you? He had 3 kids. You have nothing. The arithmetic of survival makes no sense, and the bonds that keep you human also tear you apart when they're severed. The farewells are brutal in their suddenness. One moment you're sharing a cigarette and complaining about lice. The next moment your friend is a red smear on the trench wall. There's no time for grief. You strip his useful equipment, pocket his personal effects to send home, and move on. Later, maybe, you'll allow yourself to remember how he used to whistle that annoying music hall tune, or the way he'd meticulously fold his letters from home into perfect squares. But not now. Now you have to survive until evening stand to. By the time the war ends, if it ends, if you survive, these bonds will be impossible to explain to anyone who wasn't there. Your wife won't understand why you wake up calling for Thompson. Your family won't grasp why you can't eat dinner without setting an extra place for Jenkins. You'll spend the rest of your life looking for these men in crowds, forgetting for moments that they're gone, reaching for ghosts who understood you in ways nobody else ever will. The brotherhood forged in these trenches is written in blood and mud and shared terror, and it's the only truly sacred thing in this godless place. When the generals talk about glory and patriotism, you'll think about Thompson saving that bread crust and know that was the real victory, not ground gained or battles won, but the simple fact that humans could still care for each other in the depths of mechanized hell. The war ends not with a bang, but with bewildered silence at 11 a.m. on November 11th. And you're still alive somehow, though alive might be too strong a word for what you've become. The guns stop firing, and the absence of noise is so profound it hurts your ears. You keep ducking from phantom shells, flinching at sounds that aren't there. Someone suggests celebrating, but nobody knows how. You've forgotten what people do when they're not trying to kill each other. A corporal starts crying and can't stop. Nobody judges him. Tears seem as reasonable a response as any. They send you home on a ship full of ghosts wearing uniforms. Men stare at nothing, twitch at seagull cries, dive for cover when someone drops a mess tin. You're returning to a world that thinks it understands what you've been through because they read sanitized newspaper accounts. They want stories of heroism and adventure. You want to scream about Thompson's intestines and the taste of gas and how rats sound when they're eating faces. But you don't. You smile and nod and say it was quite rough, because anything else makes people uncomfortable. Your family doesn't recognize you at the station. You've lost 3 stone and aged 20 years. Your mother keeps touching your face like she's trying to find her son under the stranger's features. Your father wants to talk about victory and duty. Your sister asks if you've met any French girls. They mean well, but every word is another mile between you and them. At dinner, you can't stop watching the exits. The scrape of cutlery sounds like bayonets. When your nephew plays with toy soldiers, you have to leave the room to vomit. Sleep becomes your new enemy. Every night, you're back in the trenches. Thompson dies repeatedly in new and creative ways. You wake up screaming orders, covered in sweat that smells like cordite and fear. Your wife, you married that girl who waited, though you're not sure why she bothered, learns to approach you carefully in the morning, speaking softly until you remember where you are. She finds you in the garden at 3 a.m., digging trenches with your bare hands. You tell her you're planting vegetables. She pretends to believe you. The doctors, when you finally see them because the screaming won't stop, call it neurasthenia and prescribe rest. Rest from what? From the memories that play on endless loop, from the way every backfiring car sounds like artillery. They suggest taking up a hobby, as if stamp collecting can somehow counterbalance watching your friends dissolve in gas clouds. One particularly helpful physician recommends putting it all behind you, and you have to leave before you show him what hand-to-hand combat training looks like. Here's what the victory parades don't show, and historians still argue about. How many casualties continued after the armistice? Men who survived 4 years of warfare step in front of trains because peacetime makes no sense. Others drink themselves to death, trying to drown memories that float like corpses. The suicide rate among veterans skyrockets, but nobody keeps accurate statistics because that would require admitting the war didn't end when the shooting stopped. You consider it yourself on bad nights, when the ghosts get too loud and the walls close in. Work is impossible. How do you explain gaps in employment history? Sorry, I was busy learning 17 ways to kill with a shovel. The skills you perfected, reading wind patterns for gas attacks, calculating artillery trajectories, identifying aircraft by sound, have no civilian application. You get a job in a factory but quit when the machinery sounds too much like machine guns. You try farming but can't dig in earth without smelling death. Eventually, you stop trying and live on your meager pension. Another casualty who inconveniently survived. The aftermath stretches into decades. You jump at unexpected touches for 30 years. Thunderstorms send you into the cellar, shaking. Your children learn not to wake daddy suddenly. Every November 11th, people wear poppies and talk about sacrifice while you try not to scream that poppies grew in blood-soaked mud, and Thompson picked one the day before he died. You're 60 before you can eat beef stew again. You're 70 before a whole night passes without nightmares. You never stop checking for tripwires before entering rooms. And now, as tonight's story draws to its close, perhaps you understand a little better why your great-grandfather flinched at fireworks, why he couldn't talk about the war, why he seemed to be listening for something nobody else could hear. The trenches of World War I didn't just scar the French countryside. They carved permanent channels through the minds of every man who survived them. Those muddy, rat-infested hellscapes live on in the nervous tics, the 1,000-yard stares, the 3 a.m. garden excavations of men who came home but never really left. Time moves forward, but part of them remains forever frozen in 1917, waiting for the next gas attack, the next order to go over the top, the next friend to disappear in a burst of red mist. They survived the war, but the war never survived them. And perhaps that's the cruelest irony of all, that the real battle began when the guns fell silent, fought not in trenches, but in minds that could never forget what humans are capable of doing to each other when civilization decides to take a holiday. So as you drift off to sleep tonight in your warm, dry bed, spare a thought for those who never truly came home, who spent the rest of their lives fighting a war that officially ended but never really stopped. Sweet dreams, and be grateful you'll never know what it means to wake up checking for gas.